Hi, my name is Lesley Knieriem, and I'm the Reader Conversations Librarian at the Rogers Public Library. If you've seen me at the library when we were open to the public, you've probably seen me at the reference desk or in the stacks of the adult fiction, which is the collection that I am responsible for purchasing and maintaining. The one thing I love to do most in the world at the library is to connect people with stories. And that's why I'm calling this series of programs Story Connections. In each program, I'm going to talk about a particular kind of story, read a little bit, and then show you how you can find more stories for yourself. While I'm doing this, I'm going to be assisted by my good friend and my partner in crime. This is Miss Maggie. Miss Maggie usually doesn't allow me to ever get on the computer without crawling up on the keyboard, but today she's decided she just wants to sleep. So we'll see if she gets interested in fairy tales. The question is, what is a fairy tale? And how can you tell it from, fantasy or magical realism or any other sort of book or story that is very similar? There is no hard and fast line, no strict definition of a fairy tale. But generally speaking, you can recognize a fairy tale by its structures and themes. Fairy tales don't go big in for explanations. They don't outline a series of magic. They don't tell you the genealogies of kings and queens. They may mention things like motor cars or Paris, but everybody really knows when and where they happened. They happened once upon a time, in the lands far away beyond those that we know. Fairy tales operate on a dream logic, thing which doesn't mean that they're nonsensical. It's a very strict rule. For example, anything that happens once is probably going to happen 3 times. But it is, as I said, the logic of dreams. Characters, though they may be lovable and memorable, are generally archetypes. They're the princess in the tower. They're the youngest son who makes good. They're the old crone by the side of the road, and you'd better treat her kindly. What makes a fairy tale, especially a fairy tale, is that things happen for a reason, but it's not any of the reasons you might expect. Bad things happen, magical creatures exist, your heroes and heroines will go through hard times, but things are gonna work out okay. We don't know why they'll work out okay. It might be luck. It might be because of true love. It might be because of the interference or support of heavenly figures or kindly fairies. But what we know, what we learn from a fairy tale is that bad things happen. Yet bad things can be overcome and will be overcome. As one of my favorite authors, Neil Gaiman, put it, the fairy tale does not teach us that there are dragons in this world. We already know that. What they teach us is that dragons can be beaten. And that's why I love fairy tales. And that's why I think they're a really useful genre right now, when we all really know that everything's going to be okay. So I'd like to read a little bit from my favorite original fairy tale. This is a fairy tale for adults, not for children. Though if you do have children who are listening, there's nothing in here that's going to be inappropriate for them to hear. It's called Stardust, and this particular version was written by Neil Gaiman and illustrated by Charles Vess. This is the original version of this story, which was printed and published as an illustrated novel. It later was reissued as a full-fledged print novel, and it was also made into a movie. All of those are wonderful. I own all of them. The library owns all of them. And as a matter of fact, the novel version is one that you can obtain right now through our library to go. But what I want to read you from is a little bit of the graphic novel, which is one of my favorite versions of this fairy tale. Stardust by Neil Gaiman and Charles Vess. In the sleepy English countryside, at the dawn of the Victorian era, lies the village of Wall, a secluded hamlet that derives its name from an imposing stone barrier that surrounds a fertile grassland. The leisurely pace in Wall is disrupted only once every 9 years, as the mortal and magical meet upon the meadow for a market fair like no other. It is here in Wall that young Tristram Thorn loses his heart to the town beauty, Victoria Forrester, a woman who is as cold and distant as the star she and Tristram see fall from the sky on a crisp October evening. To gain the hand of his beloved, Tristram rashly vows to fetch the fallen star and embarks on a lover's quest that will carry him over the ancient wall and into a world beyond his wildest imaginings. As I start this reading, in chapter 4, Tristram has already gone through the wall into the land of Faerie. There he encounters a small, hairy, man-type creature who thinks that he owes Tristram a favor and wants to repay it. So he takes Tristram's clothes and his pack and vanishes to a nearby town, promising Tristram that he will bring back what he needs to complete his quest to fetch the falling star. The little hairy man had taken Tristram's ripped coat and trousers and waistcoat and left him covered by a blanket and walked into the village, which nestled into the valley between 3 other covered hills. Tristram sat under the blanket in the warm evening and waited. Lights flickered in the hawthorn bush behind him. He thought they were glowworms or fireflies, but on closer inspection, he perceived that they were tiny people, flickering and flitting from branch to branch. He coughed politely. A score of tiny eyes stared down at him. Several of the little creatures vanished. Others retreated high into the hawthorn bush, while a handful, braver than the others, flitted toward him. They began to laugh in high, bell-tinkling tones, pointing down at Tristram in his broken boots and blanket and underclothes and bowler hat. Tristram blushed red and pulled the blanket about himself. One of the little folks sang, "Hankety-pankety, boy in a blanket, he's off on a goose chase to look for a star. Incontrovertibly journeys through fairy, strip off the blanket to see who you are." And another one sang, Tristram Thorn, does not know why he was born, and a foolish oath has sworn. Trews and coats and shirt are torn, so he sits here all forlorn, soon to face his true love's scorn. Wistrin, Bristrin, Tristram Thorn. "Be off with you, you silly thing," said Tristram, his face burning, and having nothing else to hand, he threw his bowler hat at them. Thus it was that, when the little hairy man arrived back from the village of revelry, although why it was called so, no man alive could say, for it was a gloomy, sombre place, and had been for time out of mind, he found Tristram sitting glumly beside a hawthorn bush, wrapped in a blanket, and bewailing the loss of his hat. "They said cruel things about my true love," said Tristram. "Miss Victoria Forrester. How dare they?" "The little folk dare anything," said his friend, "and they talks a lot of nonsense. But they talks an awful lot of sense as well. You listen to 'em at your peril, and you ignore 'em at your peril too. They said I was soon to face my true love's scorn." Did they indeed? The little hairy man was laying a variety of clothes out upon the grass. Even in the moonlight, Tristram could see that the clothes he was laying out bore no manner of resemblance to the clothes that Tristram had removed earlier in the day. In the village of Wall, men wore brown and gray and black, and even the reddest neckerchief worn by the ruddiest of farmers was soon faded by the sun and the rain to a more mannerly color. Tristram looked at the crimson canary and russet cloth, at clothes which looked more like the costumes of traveling players or the contents of his cousin Joan's charades chest, and he said, "My clothes?" "These are your clothes now," said the little hairy man proudly. "I traded 'em. This stuff's better quality. See, it won't rip and tear as easily, and it's neither tattered nor torn, and withal you'll not stick out so much as a stranger. This is what people wears hereabouts, you see." Tristram contemplated making the rest of his quest wrapped in a blanket, like a savage aboriginal from one of his school books. Then, with a sigh, he took off his boots and let the blanket fall to the grass, and with a little hairy man as his guide, "No, laddie, these go over that. Mercy, what do they teach them nowadays?" He was soon dressed in his fine new clothes. The new boots fit him better than the old ones ever had. They certainly were fine new clothes. While clothes do not, as the saying would sometimes have it, make the man, and fine feathers do not make fine birds, sometimes they can add a certain spice to a recipe, and Tristram Thorn in crimson and canary was not the same man that Tristram Thorn in his overcoat and Sunday suit had been. There was a swagger to his steps, a jauntiness to his movements that had not been there before. His chin went up instead of down, and there was a glint in his eye that he had not possessed when he had worn a bowler hat. By the time they had eaten the meal that the little hairy man had brought back with him from revelry, which consisted of smoked trout, a bowl of fresh-shelled peas, several raisin cakes, and a bottle of small beer, Tristram felt quite at home with his new garb. "Now then," said the little hairy man, "you saved my life, laddie, back there in the wood, and your father, he done me a good turn back before you was born, and never let it be said that I'm a cove what doesn't pay his debts." Tristram began to mutter something about how his friend had already done more than enough for him, but the little hairy man ignored him and continued, "So I was a-pondering. You know where your star is, don't you?" Tristram pointed, without a thought, to the dark horizon. Now then, how far is it? Do you know that?" Tristan had not given the matter any thought hitherto, but he found himself saying, "A man could walk, only stopping to sleep, while the moon waxed and waned above him half a dozen times, crossing treacherous mountains and burning deserts, before he reached the place where the star had fallen." It did not sound like him at all, and he blinked with surprise. "As I thought," said the little hairy man, approaching his bundle and bending over it so Tristram could not see how it unlocked. "And it's not like you're the only one who'll be looking for it. You remember what I told you before? About digging a hole to bury my dung in?" "No, not that." "About telling no one my true name, nor my destination?" "Nor yet that." Then what?" "How many miles to Babylon?" recited the man. "Oh, yeah, that." "Can I get there by candlelight?" "There and back again." "Only it's the candle wax, you see. Most candles won't do it. This one took a bit of finding." And he pulled out a candle stub the size of a crabapple and handed it to Tristan. Tristram could see nothing in any way out of the ordinary about the candle stub. It was a wax candle, not tallow, and it was much used and melted. The wick was charred and black. What do I do with it?" he asked. "All in good time," said the little hairy man, and took something else from his pack. "Take this, too. You'll need it." It glittered in the moonlight. Tristram took it. It seemed to be a thin silver chain, with a loop at each end. It was cold and slippery to the touch. "What is it?" "Oh, the usual. Cat's breath and fish scales and moonlight on a mill pond, melted and smithied and forged by the dwarfs. You'll be needing it to bring back your star with you." "I will?" "Oh, yes." Tristram let the chain fall into his palm. It felt like quicksilver. "Where do I keep it? I have no pockets in these confounded clothes." "Wrap it around your wrist until you need it. There you go. But you've a pocket in your tunic under there, see?" Tristram found the concealed pocket. Above it there was a small buttonhole, and in the buttonhole he placed the snowdrop, the glass flower that his father had given him as a luck token as they had left Wall. He wondered whether it was in fact bringing him luck, and if it were, was it good luck or bad? Tristram stood up. He held his leather bag tightly in his hand. "Now then," said the little hairy man, "this is what you gotta do. Take up the candle in your right hand. I'll light it for you. And then walk to your star. Then use the chain and bring it back here. Now there's not much wick left on the candle, so you best be snappy about it and step lively. Any dawdling, and you'll regret it. Feet be nimble and light, yeah?" I suppose so, yes," said Tristram. He stood expectantly. The little hairy man passed a hand over the candle, which lit with a flame yellow above and blue below. There was a gust of wind, but the flame did not flicker even the slightest bit. Tristram took the candle in his hand and began to walk forward. The candlelight illuminated the world, every tree and bush and blade of grass. With Tristram's next step, he was standing beside a lake, and the candlelight shone brightly on the water. And then he was walking through the mountains, through lonely crags, where the candlelight was reflected in the eyes of the creatures of the high snows. And then he was walking through the clouds, which, while not entirely substantial, still supported his weight in comfort. And then, holding tightly to his candle, he was underground, and the candlelight glinted back at him from wet cave walls. Now he was in the mountains once more, and then he was on a road through a wild forest, and he glimpsed a chariot being pulled by 2 goats, being driven by a woman in a red dress, who looked, for the glimpse he got of her, the way Boadicea was drawn in history books. And another step, and he was in a leafy glen, and he could hear the chuckle of water as it splashed and sang its way into a small brook. He took another step, but he was still in the glen. There were high ferns and elm trees and foxgloves in abundance, and the moon had set in the sky. He held up the candle, looking for a fallen star, but he saw nothing. He heard something, though, under the babbling of the brook, a sniffling and a swallowing, the sound of someone trying not to cry. Hello?" said Tristram. The sniffling stopped, but Tristram was certain he could see a light beneath a hazel tree, and he walked toward it. "Excuse me," he said, hoping to pacify whoever was sitting beneath the hazel tree, and praying that it was not more of the little people who had stolen his hat. "I'm looking for a star?" In reply, a clod of wet earth came from under the tree and hit Tristram on the side of his face. It stung a little, and fragments of the earth fell down his collar and under his clothes. "I won't hurt you," he said loudly. This time, as another clod of earth came hurtling towards him, he ducked out of the way, and it smashed into an elm tree behind him. He walked forward. "Go away," said a voice all raw and gulping, which sounded like it had just been crying. Just go away and leave me alone." She was sprawled awkwardly beneath the hazel tree, and she gazed up at Tristram with a scowl of complete unfriendliness. She hefted another clod of mud at him menacingly, but did not throw it. Her eyes were red and raw. Her hair was so fair that it was almost white. Her dress was of blue silk, which shimmered in the candlelight. She glittered as she sat there. "Please don't throw any more mud at me," pleaded Tristram. "Look, I didn't mean to disturb you. It's just there's a star fallen somewhere around here, and I have to get it back before the candle burns out." I broke my leg, said the young lady. I'm sorry, said Tristram. But the star? I broke my leg, she told him sadly, when I fell. And with that she heaved her lump of mud at him. Glittering dust fell from her arm as it moved. The clod of mud hit Tristram in the chest. Go away, she sobbed, burying her face in her arms. Go away and leave me alone. You're the star, said Tristram, comprehension dawning. And you're a clodpole, said the girl bitterly, and a ninny, a numbskull, a lackwit, and a coxcomb. Yes, said Tristram. I suppose I am at that. And with that, he wound one end of the silver chain and slipped it around the girl's slim wrist. He felt the loop of the chain tighten about his own wrist. She stared up at him bitterly. What? She asked in a voice that was suddenly beyond outrage, beyond hate. Do you think you are doing? Taking you home with me, said Tristram. I made an oath. And the candle stub guttered violently, the last of the wick afloat in the pool of wax, and for a moment the candle flame flared high, illuminating the glen and the girl and the chain, unbreakable, that ran from her wrist to his. Then the candle went out. Tristram stared at the star, at the girl, and with all his might managed to say nothing at all. Can I get there by candlelight? He thought. There and back again. But the candlelight was gone, and the village of Wall was 6 months' hard travel from here. I just want you to know, said the girl coldly, that whoever you are and whatever you intend to do with me, I shall give you no aid of any kind, nor shall I assist you, and I shall do whatever is in my power to frustrate your plans and devices. And then she added, with feeling, Idiot. Said Tristram. Can you walk? No, she said. My leg's broken. Are you deaf as well as stupid? Do your kind sleep? He asked her. Of course, but not at night. At night we shine. Well, he said, I'm going to try and get some sleep. I can't think of anything else to do. It's been a long day for me, what with everything, and maybe you should try to sleep too. We've got a long way to go. The sky was beginning to lighten. Tristram put his head on his leather bag in the glen and did his best to ignore the insults and imprecations that came his way from the girl in the blue dress at the end of the chain. He wondered what the little hairy man would do when Tristram did not return. He wondered what Victoria Forrester was doing at the moment, and decided that she was probably asleep in her bed, in her bedroom, in her father's farmhouse. He wondered whether 6 months was a long walk, and what they would eat along the way. He wondered what stars ate. And then he was asleep. Dunderhead! Bumpkin! Dolt! said the star. And then she sighed and made herself as comfortable as she could under the circumstances. The pain from her leg was dull but continual. She tested the chain about her wrist, but it was tight and fast, and she could neither slip from it nor break it. "Cretinous, verminous oath!" she muttered, and then she too slept. So, if you want to learn more about what happens with Tristram and his star, you're going to have to check out the book or the movie or the graphic novel. And I'll show you in just a minute how you can do that and how you can find more original fairy tales intended for adults. The easiest way to find the rest of the story would be to go to our catalog on our webpage, rogerspubliclibrary.org, and look for Stardust by Neil Gaiman. This will bring up all the different versions we own of the story, in Spanish, as a movie, in large print and regular print. But since the library's closed to the public right now, you might instead want to go to our downloadable section, which you can find by clicking on the Overdrive tab. And there you'll see that we own Stardust, the novel version, as both an ebook and as an audiobook. To check it out, just click where it tells you, and that will take you to the book where you can sign in and borrow it as you would any other book through our Library to Go collection. Remember that your PIN number may have changed to the last 4 digits of your library card number. If you like Neil Gaiman, you can also take a look and see what other materials we have by him in Library to Go. If you're particularly interested in fairy tales, I would highly recommend Neverwhere and The Spindle and the Sleeper, and also, of course, his haunting exploration of the fairyland of our childhood, the ocean at the end of the lane. There are many, many other original fairy tales in the Rogers Public Library collection. I've highlighted here some of my very favorite. They can be found in the sections designated for teens and for children and for adults, but all of them share the unique structure, dreamlike imagery of a true fairy tale. The ones that are marked with the O here are also available as digital downloads through our Overdrive collection. But the library is not the only place you can find downloadable digital material, and certainly not for fairy tales. If you're not familiar with it, I would highly recommend Project Gutenberg, which you can reach at gutenberg.org, which has over 60,000 absolutely free ebooks, which are currently out of copyright. These are mostly older titles, but when you're talking for fairy tales, that's almost a benefit. For example, you can find the original fairy tales of the Brothers Grimm. Those of you who remember the blue and red and yellow fairy books of Andrew Lang from your childhood, those are all here and just as wonderful as you remember. You can also find original fairy tales by Oscar Wilde, such as The Happy Prince and The Selfish Giant. And if you haven't encountered, I cannot too highly recommend the stunning, gorgeous, lyrical fairy tales of George MacDonald. For children, he wrote The Light Princess, The Princess and the Goblin, and The Princess and Curdie. But also for adults, he wrote the truly amazing fairy tale novel. Oh, I know it's here. Sorry. Fantasties. And I guarantee that you've never read anything else that's quite like it. Finally, for the true fairy tale nerd, I'd like to recommend the website Tor.com, which is a great resource for anything dealing with science fiction, fantasy, or anything like that. And to check out the series by Mary Ness about fairy tales. And here you will find dozens of in-depth links and analyses researching the history of fairy tales, drawing connections between them, different versions of them, how they've been transformed into movies, into ballets, and really enough fairy tale reading to last you for the rest of our isolation period. And here are these resources, those resources that I just mentioned, if you didn't catch them as I was showing you how to find them. But finally, I'd like to leave you with a thought. Remember how I mentioned that Neil Gaiman said that the whole point of a fairy tale is not to tell you that there are dragons, but to tell you how to defeat them? Well, he actually got that idea from a much older writer, G.K. Chesterton, and this is possibly my absolute favorite thing that anybody ever said about fairy tales. Remember that fairy tales provide for us all is that Saint George will kill the dragon, that there is something in the universe more mystical than darkness and stronger than strong fear. I think that's exactly what we all need in these frightening times. I hope you have enjoyed the first of these Story Connections programs. I have future ones planned on topics like cozy mysteries and retellings of classic literatures. If there's any other genre or type of story you would like me to explore, please let me know either through the comments or by sending an email to askalibrarian@rogersar.org. Thank you.